Voyager always had the best premise of any Star Trek show. Star Trek Voyager premiered 30 years ago with a unique premise that's still among the best of any Star Trek show. The Starship Enterprise's original mission in both Star Trek, the original series, and Star Trek, The Next Generation, was to explore strange new worlds. Star Trek Deep Space Nine was entrusted with guarding the Bajoran wormhole, ultimately protecting the Alpha Quadrant from the Gamma Quadrant's invading Dominion forces. While the TNG cast moved on to movies and DS9 set the stage for its Dominion War, Star Trek Voyager promised an interesting twist on the familiar Star Trek formula. Star Trek Voyager's premiere episode, Caretaker, opened at the then familiar locale of Deep Space Nine, where Captain Catherine Janeway's Kate Mulgrew USS Voyager launched its inaugural mission to retrieve Commander Chakotay's Robert Beltran Maquis Raider from the nearby Badlands. Both ships were flung across 70,000 light-years to the Delta Quadrant, an as yet unseen corner of Star Trek's galaxy. After Janeway destroyed the Caretaker's array that brought them both there in order to save the Ocampa, the USS Voyager's combined Starfleet and Maquis crew would have to survive the 75-year journey back home. Star Trek Voyager's secret weapon was the show's unique mission. Star Trek Voyager's secret weapon was the well-defined and deceptively simple mission to get back home. Star Trek Voyager didn't have to struggle for purpose in its earlier seasons, because storylines that didn't work, like Voyager's early Kazan arc, could be forgotten as the USS Voyager continued its homeward journey. More compelling encounters, like the USS Voyager's inevitable run-ins with the Borg, could be extended into longer arcs. Being the United Federation of Planets' lone representative in the Delta Quadrant redefined classic Star Trek moral quandaries, earning Janeway a place among the best Star Trek captains by fiercely protecting her crew. A unique mission allowed Star Trek Voyager to remix proven Star Trek formulas, because Janeway's Starfleet crew and Chakotay's Maquis crew had to navigate an unexplored part of space while figuring out how to work together. Voyager's Delta Quadrant setting took Star Trek back to Captain James T. Kirk's William Shatner Enterprise, exploring an unknown final frontier in Star Trek, the original series. With a half-Maquis crew, Voyager could technically honor John Roddenberry's vision of no interpersonal conflict among Starfleet officers, while maintaining the friction between characters that elevated Star Trek Deep Space Nine storytelling. Voyager always had the best premise of any Star Trek show. More than any other Star Trek show, Star Trek Voyager's premise created a central tenet to build Voyager stories around. Unlike the open-ended voyages of the Starship Enterprise, the USS Voyager's weekly adventures presented new possibilities to cut the trip short or prolong the journey. Star Trek Voyager's conundrums would typically add to or subtract from the initial 75-year estimate. Star Trek Voyager's new aliens also helped make the Delta Quadrant an exciting setting. Audiences already knew what to expect from Romulans and Klingons, but Vidians and Hirogen were unknown to Voyager's viewers and characters alike. Star Trek Voyager's premise expanded the Star Trek universe in ways that other Star Trek shows hadn't. The addition of 7 of 9 in Season 4 revisited the Borg as iconic Star Trek villains, building on what Star Trek The Next Generation had only begun to dive into. Star Trek Voyager's other breakout character, the Doctor, redefined Star Trek holograms as capable of evolving, akin to a new species. The USS Voyager's ultimate goal to get home meant Voyager pushed Star Trek technology even further than DS9's Dominion War had, introducing the quantum slipstream drive and merging Borg technology with Starfleet designs. When it comes to the Star Trek franchise, each series brings its own unique take on the final frontier. The original Star Trek set the foundation for exploring strange new worlds. The Next Generation expanded on those themes with more philosophical depth, and Deep Space Nine broke new ground with serialized storytelling and political intrigue. However, Star Trek Voyager stood apart from them all with what was arguably the best premise in the entire franchise: a lone Federation starship, stranded 70,000 light-years from home, forced to navigate the perils of an unknown quadrant with no backup, no resupply, and no easy way back. At its core, Voyager was a survival story. Unlike the well-supported, well-connected Enterprise crews of other series, Captain Janeway and her crew had to make do with what they had, repair their ship with alien technology, and negotiate their way through a hostile and mysterious galaxy. This premise set up an inherently compelling narrative, one that blended exploration, moral dilemmas, and the raw struggle to endure. The stakes felt real in a way that other Star Trek shows didn't always capture, as each encounter had the potential to bring them one step closer to home or one step closer to disaster. What made Voyager's premise even stronger was the tension within its crew. Unlike previous series, where Starfleet personnel were largely on the same page, Voyager had to integrate a faction of Maquis rebels, former enemies of the Federation, into its ranks. This forced characters to reevaluate their loyalties and personal codes of conduct, adding an element of internal conflict that was unique to the show. While Deep Space Nine thrived on external political conflicts, Voyager's battles were often just as much about the tensions within its own walls. Then there was the Delta Quadrant itself, a vast, uncharted expanse filled with unknown civilizations, strange anomalies, and powerful threats. Without the safety net of Starfleet Command, Voyager had to forge its own alliances and define its own rules of engagement. This premise allowed the show to introduce fascinating alien species like the Hirogen, the Kazon, and of course, the terrifying Borg, who were more formidable than ever in their home turf. Unlike the Federation's known adversaries, these new foes had no diplomatic ties, no treaties, and no reason to see Voyager as anything other than prey. Another compelling element of Voyager's premise was the ship itself. It wasn't a massive, well-equipped flagship like the Enterprise, but a smaller, sleeker vessel designed for short-range missions. The crew had to stretch their resources and adapt, making use of whatever they could scavenge, barter for, or repurpose. Unlike other Star Trek series, where the ship could always return to a friendly starbase for repairs, Voyager had to be self-sufficient. That gave the show a persistent sense of urgency and vulnerability. Beyond the setting and conflicts, Voyager's premise provided the perfect framework for strong character arcs. Captain Janeway, the first female lead in a Star Trek series, had to balance being a leader, a scientist, and sometimes even a surrogate parent to her crew. Her decisions carried immense weight, as there was no admiral to call for advice. The burden of command was heavier on her shoulders than any captain before her, making her one of the most complex and compelling figures in Trek history. Similarly, characters like Seven of Nine, rescued from the Borg and struggling to reclaim her humanity, benefited enormously from the show's premise. Her arc was only possible in Voyager's setting, where she had no choice but to reintegrate into a small, isolated crew. Likewise, the Doctor, an emergency medical hologram, grew into something more than just a program, largely because Voyager's circumstances forced him to evolve. The ship's predicament necessitated these character developments in ways that simply wouldn't have been possible in a more traditional Starfleet setting. Even the episodic nature of Voyager played to the strengths of its premise. Every new episode had the potential to introduce an entirely unfamiliar culture or challenge, reinforcing the idea that this was truly unexplored space. Unlike the later Star Trek, Enterprise, which was also about early exploration but constrained by established canon, Voyager had free rein to create new lore and expand the Star Trek universe in unexpected ways. Critics of Voyager often point to the fact that the show didn't always fully capitalize on its premise. There were stretches where the Maquis Starfleet tension was underutilized, or where the ship seemed to be in too pristine a condition given its